I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Brandon Sklenar, who stars as Spencer Dutton on 1923. And Brandon, one of the first things that strikes me about this show is that it is in many ways very different from the Yellowstone universe, which is always usually focused on one specific area, whereas you get this kind of like transcontinental storyline. And so I guess when you first read the script, what was the first thing that jumped out to you about this character, knowing that you're going into this established universe?
Well, yeah, just kind of like the sweeping nature of it, you know what I mean? Just like kind of like you said, I mean, 83 was very isolated in sort of their journey out west, and um, Yellowstone is Yellowstone. It's on the ranch, and yeah, I mean the sort of epic, old school, sweeping quality of it. This like Homer's Odyssey. I'll call it. Uh, yeah, it's very exciting because I mean, when I heard of it being in pre-production, I kind of figured it would just be in Montana on the ranch, and it would kind of just pick up, 20, 30 years later, and we do the thing. But I had no idea, just the epic nature of just the scope of it, and everywhere we go, it's pretty wild. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody I've talked to, because I've spoken to people, particularly on 1883, about the conditions of filming, and they talk about the cold and the heat, but you have like a completely separate existence, in terms of where you're filming. So what were some of the challenges that were unique to filming, particularly in some of those kind of desert locations and on the boats and things like that? Was it kind of different in terms of what we've thought about
Yeah,
with 18 with the other rest of the Yellowstone universe?
yeah. I mean, Taylor's pretty notorious for really putting his actors through it, and I mean, I love that personally. I'm all about getting dirty and really feeling it. It makes it a whole lot easier if your character's meant to be out in the wild and you're actually out in the wild, and you know you're not on the Warner Brothers lot and going to a nice trailer, and air conditioning all the time. And uh, yeah, I mean, we probably the most difficult aspect of it was just the schedule and the frequency of travel. We shot 6 days a week most weeks, and we'd be traveling on the seventh on a charter plane somewhere else in South Africa, and I don't think we were in a single location for more than 5 days ever. So it was a pretty wild schedule, and you know we're out in the bush. You're landing in Johannesburg. You're driving 4 hours in a van, and you're in the middle of nowhere and in the bush and on a game preserve, having wild elephants and giraffes walk up in the middle of a take. It's pretty wild. And then flying to Malta, I mean, I think physically the most challenging was all the water work in Malta. Honestly, I thought I was a good swimmer, but I I uh, I remember leading up to it. Jason Rodriguez, our stunt coordinator, who's just absolutely phenomenal. Hey, buddy, my dog. Uh, he he's like, "You guys can swim, right?" And I'm thinking, "Yeah, I can swim. I'm a great swimmer." And we started doing swimming lessons and swimming training, and when we were in Montana during cowboy camp, and I quickly realized that my swimming skills were not up to par for what we were going to have to be doing, and it was yeah, it was a little brutal, and then also the water was freezing, so it's it was challenging, and Taylor will write these really beautiful emotional moments, and on either side of them are very physical things you have to do as an actor. So, with the Malta stuff, we'd be in a water tank for 8 hours that's filled with ocean water, and it's 50 degrees outside and it's breezy, and you're just take after take after take coming up out of the water, swimming, get on the boat, emotional scene, dive back in the water, swim, swim, swim. So, 3 or 4 days of that, it definitely added up, and my nervous system was pretty shot. But again, I also love that because as an actor, you don't really have to do much acting. It's very real for you, and there's not much method or technique involved in actually putting yourself through the shit and feeling it all. So
Yeah, that's one of the things that a lot of people have said just working on Taylor's projects is that, as physically demanding as they can be, is that sometimes that stuff actually helps you get to the character a lot faster. Did you find that to be the case?
oh yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, it's all energy, it's all energy. And if you have to carry a level of intensity, which this character does pretty much at all times, the stakes in his entire universe are so high constantly. He's never just kicking back. And even when he is, it was hours after he was almost killed by a leopard, or hours before he's going to go kill a lion or whatever. So he's always sort of in a fight or flight state, and you know being able to actually be in that state, just as me as Brandon, yeah, it makes it that much easier to get into those spaces, because your nervous system is actually in that space. And um you're not having to do jumping jacks and push-ups and whatnot to get your blood moving, because you're on a climate controlled sound stage or something.
Well, I think that what you just said was going to segue perfectly into my next question, because that fight or flight aspect of Spencer seems so ingrained in him. What was the first thing that you connected to just about the character?
I think just, I mean, when I first read the breakdown, they told me that he was a veteran, and they told me he was a big game hunter, and that he was sort of running from his demons by putting himself in these dangerous situations. And I mean, I'm not a hunter. I don't I don't I don't even kill spiders most of the time. I kind of have a policy of just not messing with things in nature. I mean, I would hunt for food if I had to. I'd have no problem there, but I'm not. It's just not in me to really do those sorts of things. And but the thing that I sort of related to was his, not that I've been to war, but just the way that he's dealt with his trauma, and just trauma in general. It's just a really interesting character study in how someone copes with trauma, and sort of their mechanisms that they use to deal with it and to move through it. And his trauma definitely made him stronger in many ways, and I think that's kind of what I hooked to the most in him. It kind of gives him this presence, and kind of a strength in a lot of in moments of absolute chaos and insanity. I think he's able to really keep his shit together, and see clearly. And I could definitely relate to him on that level.
I you're playing a character that is part of this established universe. There's been so many things written about establishing the family tree between the various Duttons and the different shows, and I'm wondering, do you feel a certain pressure to put a certain trait, a characteristic, to fit in with the rest of the family, or is that just too much weight to even try to put on and just focus on the character in front of you?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it a pressure necessarily, but it's pretty. I mean, for me, it's very ideal to sort of have living examples in 1883 and in Yellowstone of what came before me and what came after me. Because as an actor, I would build that out anyway. I'd build out that backstory and ask those questions. Who are my parents? What were they like? What was my sister like? What was my brother like? Um, and to have that in 1883 and to have a visual representation of that was just like such a gift, because all those questions are answered for you. And as a viewer, I watched that show and I was in tears almost every episode of that show, and it affected me so emotionally that you know perfect for Spencer, because I have those memories just as a viewer, that Spencer would have those memories as himself as a child, or hearing stories of his parents going through that. So it was such a gift in that sense. So yeah, not really much pressure, but um, definitely a treat. I mean, because you could also look into the future and see Costner and see how he does his thing, and how Luke does his thing, and you can see where they may have gotten those traits from and how they handle conflict or how they deal with their emotions. And there's definitely this Dutton quality that all the men have in how they go about handling problems. And there's a through line in terms of their inner life, and there's like us in their soul almost. Yeah, I definitely would look at that and steal something there from Costner maybe, or from Casey, and conversely from Tim, the way Tim played my father in 83. Specifically would look at how he rode his horse, and which we haven't seen me do yet, but you just you just you just taking all these nuggets. um
You're like a sponge. You're like it's almost by
yeah,
like osmosis almost.
yeah, of course. And you steal some things from other, from even outside of this universe, from just those classic films, your Bogarts and your Eastwoods and your Jimmy Stewarts and what have you. That's so much fun. That's half of the fun of this whole thing, is just piecing all those puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is you mentioned about the through line of how the men in this family deal with things, and there's certainly, I think, a statement to be made about masculinity, because what I think this show does so beautifully in all of its iterations is that there's not just one definition of it. There's not just one type. And we get to see Spencer being vulnerable and being romantic, and this true love that develops.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, 100%. I mean, because he is so obviously just on the page, and when you're reading the scripts, you're like, well, this is one of the most masculine dudes that I've read ever, in terms of like, this World War I, decorated World War I hero veteran who's lives off of whiskey and meat, and like smokes rolled cigarettes, and kills lions, and it's just like just oozes with that level of sort of old school masculinity that you don't really see in the modern age. And I think in the past, in popular media and just in our history, that masculinity oftentimes will come with some less than desirable character traits. As appealing as it is on certain levels, it's often very unappealing on other levels once you look a little closer beyond the cool factor of what the zeitgeist has sort of quantified it as. And I think, uh, what's great with Taylor is, it's almost a reflection of how he is as a person. I mean, that man is so masculine. He is a cowboy. He's like handsome, tough cowboy, very strong cowboy, but that man has so much sensitivity and so much vulnerability, and so much of an understanding of humanity. And he really puts that into each of these men, almost a reflection of him in some way. And yeah, he does it so beautifully. And I was just happy that that's the way Spencer came across, because that was my intention. I believe that was his intention, in terms of, let's take this incredibly old school sort of archetype and flip it on its head. And yes, he can do all those things, but also the longer that he spends with Alexandra, the more that sort of exterior is chipped away at, and this boyish vulnerability comes out, and he sort of becomes like this child at times, and this playfulness comes out, and his loyalty, and his vulnerability, and his openness, and his ability to express, and yeah, it's really beautiful just from an outsider point of view. Just even removing myself from it, it's amazing the way Taylor's able to do that.
I just wanted to ask very quickly. It's always difficult when when your characters, or in this case, this couple, takes on kind of a life of its own, and people so rooting for this couple. And so, at what point during this whole process did you realize that the Spencer Alexandra thing was like turning into a big thing? Because it has.
Probably like the third episode or so, second episode, when we read that, I was like, okay, I see where this is going. We weren't sure at first, and then I think it's really that second and third episode when they're getting married after knowing each other for a few weeks, and she's running away with him. We collectively, we were like, okay, this is gonna turn into a pretty epic, sweeping love story here. And then especially even at the end in episode 8 of part 1 of season 1, whatever you want to call it, when they're ripped away, it's so tragic, and that's not the end of it. It's the stakes just got higher and higher. So yeah, I'm really excited to see where he takes it, because none of us have any idea. So,
which is why I'm not even going to bother asking.
Yeah, people ask me, I'm like, dude, if let me know, because I have no idea. Yeah, no one knows.
Well, Brandon, congratulations on a great first season. Looking forward to season 2. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout the season. Brandon Sklenar, a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you.